Now on the video podcast to talk about Rod Johnson, founder of Midwest Mountaineering, is Rudi Hargesheimer. Rudi worked for Rod for about 40 years, knew him personally, professionally, and through adventures in the outdoors. Rudi, thanks for taking some time today.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be here.
All right. Well, let's just talk about Rod. What kind of person he was to be in the outdoors with and be in business with, and tell us
As
about
you said, I've known him a long time, and I'll start with when I first met him, which was 1969 at Minnesota Rovers outing club meetings at the University of Minnesota, and he would stand in the aisles there at Physics Hall 150 and sell stuff, climbing gear mostly, to the other climbers that were in the crowd. And Rovers back then was really big. We'd fill up this 150 seat space, and he sold quite a bit of things from out of his backpack. So shortly after that, we did a rover trip to Saguaro National Monument in Tucson, and the idea was to backpack and climb Mica Peak, which is on the east side there. And there's a great photo of Rod putting a giant rock into his backpack, frame pack. And the idea being that he wanted to make his pack heavier than it needed to be as a testing thing for his upcoming climb of Mount McKinley, which is what it was called back then. I think this is before they named it Denali. And we all thought that was odd. And sure enough, my whole experience with Rod had over the years was filled with odd, eccentric things like that. He began Midwest Mountaineering when he hitchhiked to California to Chenard Equipment Company. And Chenard Equipment is currently known as Patagonia and Great Pacific, or Black Diamond climbing gear. And at that time, it was basically a blacksmith shop where Yvon Chouinard made pitons and such for the early climbing that was done in those days. And he talked Yvon Chouinard into letting him buy on credit a bunch of climbing equipment so that he could bring it back and sell it to his friends. And he did that under the name of Johnson Company. And he called himself Johnson Company because his father was Larry Johnson, a real estate man, and he had letterhead paper which said the Johnson Company. So just so that he could use that letterhead paper, he named himself Johnson Company. It wasn't because of his ego. So later he got wise and said, let's name it Midwest Mountaineering. Let's actually open a store. And it opened on Hennepin Avenue, downtown Minneapolis. There they sold climbing, backpacks, and shortly after that, cross-country skis. And, you know, cross-country skiing was relatively new at the time. We became, or it was before me at the store, they became pretty good cross-country skiers because they would go to Colorado and take lessons from Sven Wick, the Olympic athlete and coach. Out there in Colorado is where a famous picture was taken, and that's of Rod and 3 other people, maybe it was 4 other people, cross-country skiing, nude. And they used that in a Minnesota Daily newspaper ad to draw people to his store on Hennepin Avenue. And it worked.
Were you in that picture, Rudi?
No, I was not in that picture. That would predated my involvement, but just barely. Back then, and even when Midwest Mountaineering existed on Cedar Avenue later, he would often put a sign on the door, handwritten sign on the front door that said "Closed, gone climbing," even though it was posted open hours. There's and some other crazy quirks of those early days were marketing type things. He did a coupon. Rod loved coupons. And anybody who shopped at Midwest Mountaineering in the past 20 years would realize this. He did a lot of coupons to get people to come in for special events and deals and leader item type things. And the ultimate coupon was one he ran in the Minnesota Daily. It said, "Good for $1." So sure enough, 400 people came into the store in one day, and they each got a $1 bill. And that worked. So he got the people in the door and he sold them some stuff. He also did handwritten newsletters, and they were always quirky. And I love this reference. I'm going to read it here. There was an advice column. It was called Dear Pack Rat. So one of the times, here's a letter, a supposed letter. A customer wrote this to Pack Rat. It said, "Dear Pack Rat, the last time I was in Midwest Mountaineering, I could not find a salesman to wait on me. Signed, Looking." Dear Looking is the answer. The salesmen at Midwest Mountaineering like to dream about women they will be taking out. If you want help, kick one of the sleeping bags on the floor until a salesman comes out. It's odd stuff like that. And but it was a hit. People loved it. It was funny. 1976 is when I started, and he hired me because there were only 4 employees, and he was going to move from Hennepin Avenue to Cedar Avenue, and he needed more help. But I started at the Hennepin store and learned the ropes, so to speak. I was a climber, backpacker. I did a lot of the things that he wanted his salespeople to do. I was not much of a canoeist or paddler at that time. So Urban Renewal forced them out of the Hennepin Avenue store. It became the technical college parking ramp. And Rod found a deal through the city of trying to rehab and renew the west bank of the University of Minnesota area, Cedar Avenue. And so he rented 309 Cedar Avenue, which is the place it was and was until the end, for $700 a month, which even then was cheap. He and his friends, they called themselves Donkey Construction, rebuilt the store, and they had a lot of work to do because it had been empty for years and had formerly been Mama Rose's restaurant and Eggafist Bakery. The floor was torn up. It was partially dirt. The ceilings were falling down. The outside was boarded up, black, painted black, but literally covered with posters for the upcoming folk music and rock and roll bands at all the bars and the coffee houses. It was quite the scene there on the West Bank. He really trusted his employees. So by then, we probably had, or during that time, we had maybe 10 employees, and we paid ourselves on Fridays. We just calculated our hours and went to the cash register and took out cash. And there was no accounting for taxes or anything like that. So it was pretty unorthodox. He was very liberal with us employees, giving us time off we wanted and huge discounts on gear so that we could actually do what we said we were experts at. And of course that worked. Our slogan became, "Ask us, we've been there." Eventually, this was quite a few years later, 1981, Rod was doing the national circuit of buying events, going out west to the trade shows and such. And he discovered this store out west called Mountain Miser. They sold used gear and factory seconds and salesman samples. And he said, we should do that. So he came back to the employees and said, I'm going to renovate the basement, and make a store called Thrifty Outfitters, which he did, except it wasn't the basement. He did it upstairs on the second floor, which we had to take possession of because it was all used as office space by other businesses. And that happened, and it was very successful. And Thrifty had a lot of good deals, but also this weird sense of humor that was evident everywhere. The walls were covered with jokes and hand-drawn articles about sometimes disrespectful of modern culture. For instance, one Minnesota Daily ad they did was trying to sell used Army surplus gear. And the headline was, absolutely no rat boogers. An odd marketing strategy, but it worked. They sold a lot of that stuff. 1985, now here's where we get into paddle sports. 1985, Rod visited, before that, he visited and talked to Gordy Sussman in Madison, Wisconsin, who ran Rutabaga, and a canoe store, and he decided that Midwest Mountaineering should copy what Rutabaga did. And Rutabaga called it Cornucopia, big deal. Most paddle sports people know about that now. So Midwest Mountaineering did it. We came back, we started the Great Minnesota Canoe event at the state fairgrounds. Now this whole idea, we tried to be democratic. Rod would bring it up at the store meetings and say, this is what I want to do. And he said, what do you employees think? And of course, most of us said, excuse me, we are climbers and backpackers. Not much of us know anything about canoes. And why do you want to do this? Well, he was insistent and he got his way, and he usually did get his way. And we did it. We started that event, and we became pretty good at expertise in canoeing, kayaking, sea kayaking, whitewater kayaking, and the ball started rolling there. The at that first event, Great Minnesota Canoe event, was at the fairgrounds. We sold Mad River, Old Town, and Wabash Valley canoes. Wabash was started by a guy named Ted Bell in Indiana. And he moved to Minnesota because his wife got a job here. And he applied to work at Midwest Mountaineering, and we hired him because of his knowledge and his expertise. He won canoe racing events. And he became a manager at Midwest Mountaineering. And at the same time, he also started his own little business out of his garage called Bell Canoe Works, which nowadays is called Northstar Canoes. At that event, the big speakers were Cliff Jacobson. Everybody knows him from Midwest Mountaineering events and Cornucopia events. And Verlin Kruger. Verlin Kruger had just finished paddling 23,000 miles on one canoe trip all over the North American continent. So that was a pretty big deal. And since that first one in 1985, we've done 76 other outdoor adventure expos. The name changed from canoe event to the more generic Outdoor Adventure Expo. And they included the best of the Banff Mountain Film Festival tours. So also along the way, Rod had some ideas that did not work out so well. He started a store called Midwest Mountaineering in Town Square in downtown St. Paul. And that only lasted about a year and a half. He was trying to sell Pendleton shirts and really nice clothing to the office crowd in near the state capitol. Well, they bought some, but not enough to pay the rent over there. So that went out of business. We also started an adventure travel department, which didn't pan out. And to do that, we had to create a space for it. So we took out part of the floor in part of the store to expose the basement. And in the basement, we had our big book department and adventure travel area. And a side note there is, when we did that renovation, we had to dig up the floor because it was all broken up concrete. And that exposed the sewer pipes that led out to the street. And we had to replace the sewer pipes because the original ones were made out of wood. And they were rotting away, obviously. So it was a lot more work than we anticipated. Rod had lots of other weird ideas. He was really into super ultralight backpacking. And he designed a vest that with like 12 pockets on the front and the back so that you could backpack without a backpack. You just wear everything. And that included his preferred mode of sleeping pad, which was just a small sheet of bubble wrap. You know, you get it for free on for packing material. And I did a chart kind of in jest of the evolution of backpacking. And it started with, you know, the hobo type carrying a sack on a stick behind his back, and evolved into a crude, you know, Duluth pack type packs with no frames. And that evolved into external frame packs, like were common when Midwest Mountaineering started. And that evolved into the modern, expensive internal frame packs. And then that devolved and got simpler and simpler and simpler into the modern ultralight nylon packs that didn't have any frame at all. And some of them didn't even have a hip belt, so that you could have your pack be as light as 6.5 ounces, which was incredible. So Rod was a big proponent of that. And of course, my chart showed the profits of outdoor stores. And it went from very high in the internal frame pack era to hardly existent in the ultralight area because of the simplicity of the products involved. Of course, that's not quite true. Some of that's expensive stuff. We did, something else. He had other inventions. He designed quite a few things and had them patented. And one of them was a tankless toilet. So you can see he had far-reaching interests. One of the good things he did, and he did many good things, he had profit sharing for the employees. So in the early days, we would just split the profits of the store. After the first 5 years, there was no profit then. But after that, things started rolling, and the individual employees also got to share in the profits in addition to their wage, which when I started was $4 an hour for everybody. Later, the profit sharing was extended to the community, to environmental projects. So Midwest Mountaineering funded many nonprofits like the Boundary Waters and the Superior Hiking Trail, Sierra Club, that type of thing. And at first, the employees voted on where to spend that money. After that, the customers voted on where we should spend the money. So all of those are pretty unique ideas. Now, Midwest got on the do-it-yourself bandwagon to save money, to make more profit in the 90s, I think, when we decided to compete with North Face and Marmot and Mountain Hardwear, all the big names, by making the stuff ourselves in China. So Rod spent quite a few trips going to China and working with manufacturers over there to produce Midwest Mountaineering brand sleeping bags, tents, rain jackets, etc. That worked pretty well until the big companies kind of forced that out of the market by having even cheaper gear that they made themselves at their normal profit margins, both at wholesale and retail. All of that effort led to, in 2010, Midwest was voted by outdoor industry experts around the nation to be the retailer of the year nationally. And locally, we were the recipient of quite a few, what did they call them? Best outdoor store in the Twin Cities. Rod had a thing for getting people involved in the outdoors as a way of helping to save the outdoors and the environment and to make people happy and to live a better life. He really believed in that. And he wanted to start, well, he did that for adults, but he wanted to start with kids. So he had a lot of programs that were designed to get kids involved in the outdoors. He started a scout troop, which worked out of the store and went on trips, teenagers. He did a lot of work for local Somali immigrants in the West Bank area. The place had quite a few immigrants from Somalia, and these kids were running around on the streets there with nothing to do. And he said, let's go kayaking. So he'd take them on kayak trips. So he was extremely generous with his time in that regard. And there was no direct profit motive in doing that. For us employees, he also sold us or let us buy things at straight cost and later at 10% above cost so that we could afford to go on these trips. And he'd give us the time off, and it worked. That's how we came up with the slogan for ourselves, ask us, we've been there, because it was true. And Rod was prone to doing the extreme versions of all these sports, specific to paddle sports. Rod did a traverse of the Patagonian end of South America by kayak. He paddle rafted and dory tripped the Grand Canyon and the Green Rivers multiple times. He kayaked whitewater sections of the Nile River while dodging crocodiles. And he did multiple BWCA trips, of course, with friends and family, and organized specific trips in the metro area for the customers right on the Mississippi River. In skiing, he did the American Birkebeiner from all along in the early days of the Birkebeiner. And the rest of us employees thought that was kind of crazy because Rod was not actually all that great of a skier, but he sure was energetic, and he just went out there and did it with no training whatsoever. It was quite incredible. He also did the Canadian Ski Marathon, which I've done twice, and he did it 3 times. It's a 100-mile race from Montreal to Ottawa. And he did it very well in terms of endurance. He was just able to plug along and get that done. He did a lot of mountain climbing, as the name implies. He tried to sneak up Mount Everest without a permit, which was a rather bold, audacious thing to do, and it didn't work. They ran out of fuel, so he and Pat Padden did that, and then he came back and said, "I'm going to do it over again." So he started the Minnesota Everest team, which was himself plus customers, and they planned on climbing Mount Everest. And along the way, they climbed Mount Rainier and the Tetons and Mount McKinley, all as preparation for climbing Mount Everest. Now, later in his years, he married Sharon Johnson, and they did a tremendous number of easier adventure travel trips throughout the world, and always came back and did seminars for the customers at our outdoor adventure expos. And their emphasis to the customers was, we did this, you can do this, here's how you do it. Go out there and have some fun. And it seemed to work. They always packed the house at our expo events. After closing the store in 2023, Rod continued hosting the Banff Mountain Film Festivals, and I suspect that he did not sell the store to the employees, which some of them wanted to buy it, or to anyone else, because he was fiercely adamant that the store be done his way, and that perhaps because of his good fortune in the early business years, nobody else could make a go of it in today's business climate. So he just decided to fold and go out with on a good note in that regard, with Midwest Mountaineering as it was, instead of changing to something else. He did endorse Steve Schrader, a manager, new upstart store, which is called Lake Street Mountaineering on Washington Avenue North. That's there now. Rod's goal always was to get people active in safe outdoor adventures. He really meant that. I think he would want to be remembered for his advocacy for outdoor adventure for everyone, more than his adrenaline pumping, extreme pursuits, or his unique business strategies, which I outlined some of them. So that's what I've got.
That's great, Rudi. Can I ask you about your reaction to his passing? He's in his mid-70s, and just how this has landed for you.
You know, Rod and I shared a cabin on the North Shore for many years. He actually bought me out because I couldn't afford to do what he wanted to do with the cabin. And that was in 2015 when I retired. So he ran the store pretty much as it was from 2015 without me involved to about 2020 or so, when the pandemic hit and times were tough, and times stayed tough. Lots of competition, actually fewer people doing all the outdoor activities that he was endorsing and trying to sell products for. And we did not communicate that much during the last 7 years or so. But we had dinner just 4 weeks ago, and he seemed at that time to be his usual self, talking about his trips and enjoying his vacation, his unlimited vacation as a retiree. And he had the money left over, and he could do whatever he wanted to do, and he seemed pretty happy. But all along, we knew he was frustrated with all the lack of, I would say, deep friendships, and I think I'll leave it at that, because I don't know. I don't want to dig into his psyche too much to explain why that would be.
And you had mentioned too, Rudi, when we were communicating ahead of our conversation today, that Rod sometimes would be viewed as controversial, or you even maybe viewed him that way. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Well, yeah, he didn't want to bring up anything that I considered very negative, but what you're alluding to is the fact that he did irritate some of his industry people, the manufacturers' reps and such, by his strong bargaining skills, and it didn't always seem fair, or his despite his great benevolence with employees, like at Christmas time, he'd give us expensive products as a gift every year. I don't know how many merino underwear tops I have. They were free every time Christmas came around. So he was great in a lot of respects, but he was stingy with the wallet, so to speak, in terms of getting a pay raise. He worked. He was obstinate in insisting that things be done his way, despite his statement that everything should be done democratically by vote with buy-in from all the employees. And usually, or often, that just didn't happen. He would want to do something, and by golly, he'd do it regardless of what we thought. And so we felt underappreciated a little bit in that regard.
And you talk a lot about, and of course, the roots of the company being in backpacking and climbing, but it did have a paddle influence in Minnesota, certainly. And I think Midwest was the launch point for many trips to the Boundary Waters. Is that fair to say, Rudi?
Boundary Waters and sea kayaking trips, whitewater. Some of our employees were very big into whitewater paddling and on the Kettle River and everywhere else. Other people were, like Andy Knapp, was kind of led the way in the upper Midwest in the whole sea kayaking theme. He was an employee, longtime employee, and he also passed away quite a few years ago from a long fight with cancer. But our store was for sure the primary spot in the whole upper Midwest, including Wisconsin, Chicago, for sea kayaks, whitewater kayaks, and telemark ski gear. You just couldn't buy telemark ski gear anywhere except at Midwest Mountaineering and way out west.
Mm-hmm. And also, you mentioned Ted Bell working there, but also Ann Bancroft had worked there, and Lonnie Dupree had done trips in partnership, or wouldn't have maybe happened without Midwest in those days. Bear Paulsen worked there. I mean, there's a lot of people that have really strong connections to Midwest and this family and culture that were created there.
Yeah, thank you. Those were all great names. And in conjunction with that Ann Bancroft, Lonnie Dupree theme, Will Steger was one of our best customers. He was always in the store buying things. Don Shelby, the news anchor, came to our store all the time because, believe it or not, he was into ice climbing. But Ann Bancroft was actually an employee. I hired Ann, and best move I ever did, except she left after, I don't know, maybe 6 months on the job, because Will Steger walked in the door and said, "I'm going to the North Pole. You should come with me. We need a female." And Ann was qualified to be that person. So she did that, and her history went from there.